So welcome to the second keynote session. It's my pleasure to introduce Juliana Freire. She's a professor at New York University. She's one of the leaders of the database research community. So she's been active in promoting reproducibility for a long time. So she received the ACM Sigmoid Contribution Award in 2020 for this work on reproducibility. She participated in the National Academy's Committee on Reproducibility and Replicability. Torsten mentioned, you know, that's basically the group who fixed the terminology and did a lot of very interesting work. So it's a pleasure for us to have you here remote, and so to talk about trust in data-driven science. Thanks, Juliana.
All right. Thank you so much, Philippe, for the kind introduction. Thanks the organizers for inviting me. I would have loved to be at this, first event in person. Unfortunately, I was not able to. And I should add that Philippe was also received the Sigmoid Prize, for also his contributions to reproducibility in the database community. All right, so I thought that this new conference that focuses on reproducibility would be a good opportunity for me to, think back about, what we've been through, what we've done, where we are today, and what should we aim for in the future. So let me start, with a little bit of background and motivation, which is that, we all know that data-driven science has really transformed science. It led to great advances, discoveries, and it's also transformed how science is done, right? So scientists went from, hypothesis-driven research to using data to derive new hypotheses. And this is what Jim Gray and colleagues termed as the fourth paradigm of science, right? So the perfect storm that led to this data-driven revolution was fueled by the fact that computing and storage have become essentially free, and we have tons and tons of data out there, right? The question that was left for scientists and computer scientists to answer was, okay, now that we're doing data-driven science, how do you ensure that we do this in the proper way, following the scientific method, and ensuring transparency and reproducibility for these research results? Right? And in theory, reproducibility for data and computation should be very easy, right? Because computations are carried out in a controlled environment. However, in practice, there are many challenges. We have lots of data that are, produced by different sources. They have different levels of reliability. And to extract insights from these data, we need to assemble complex workflows that, to perform a number of different complex steps, from data acquisition to cleaning and integration, to analyzing and visualizing the data, to creating predictive models. Right. And as we embarked on, this fourth paradigm of science, we use ad hoc approaches to create these pipelines, these workflows. And very soon we realized that that led to problems. And there was a lot of, talk and discussions about the pitfalls that we were falling into. Like, it's impossible to verify most of the results that are published in papers. We have lots of pretty pictures, but nobody can repeat the experiments that are described. And essentially the papers that we're publishing are simply an advertisement of scholarship. They're not really the scholarship. And this issue, became very visible, not just in the academic community, because the New York Times started publishing over and over again different kinds of retractions for papers that couldn't be reproduced. The Economist published a big piece entitled "Trouble at the Lab," where they, talked about a lot of things that are going wrong with science. papers were published talking about, most research findings are false. Economists estimated the cost of non-reproducible work for biology at $28 billion per year. And all of this led to interventions to be designed by different institutions. Like, for example, the NIH started to pay attention and invest in, how to ensure rigor for research. And this culminated in 2018, where the US Congress actually commissioned a study that Philippe mentioned on, for us to understand what is the state of reproducibility and replicability in science. Right. At that point, we have a conundrum, because everybody agrees that computational reproducibility is important and necessary. There are a number of incentives and venues that were encouraging authors to publish reproducible results. Everybody was discussing it. The funding agency were encouraging people to work in a reproducible way. But the reality was that few people were actually doing it. And the big question is why? And another question is, people talked about crisis, but is there a real crisis? And how can we change the status quo? How can we make reproducibility more widely adopted? And these questions were questions that we actually had spent a lot of time discussing at the National Academy Study Group. And I'll try to share some of the answers we reached there, as well as, over the many years that I've been working on, this problem of computational reproducibility, right? Through a number of different workshops, a number of different workshops and meetings and discussions with many different stakeholders, there was a consensus that if we really want to broaden the adoption of reproducibility best practices, we need a multi-pronged approach that concurrently addresses 4 different challenges. First, we need tools that make reproducibility really easy, because if it's very easy, more people will do it, and they won't have the excuse that it's actually hard and time-consuming. We need to have reach and education and teach people about not just best practices, but tools and infrastructure that are available and enable reproducibility. We also need to create and institutionalize an incentive structure so that people be willing and motivated to actually work the right way. And last but not least, a stick is often very effective. And I'll talk about some of the recent developments on that end. Right. So let me start with tools, which is, the area that I've worked more on. Let me start by taking, a trip down to memory lane. And this is a slide that I used in a presentation from 2008. And yes, I'm old. I've been around the block for a long time. This was the era of the scientific workflows. And they emerged as a way of organizing and going from the ad hoc approaches to building computational process to a more systematic approach, right? And these scientific workflow systems, they help scientists to conceptualize and manage their computations, simulations, visualizations, and so on and so forth, right? And because you have this nice environment, centralized environment that orchestrates all these computations, they can actually capture provenance, the whole history of your experiment in a systematic way. Thus, it enables automation, reproducibility, as well as result sharing, right? We saw, from 2008 to maybe, for about 10 years, we saw a number of workflow systems that were created both in industry as well as in academia. Right. So what were the good features of these systems? As I said, the fact that it can automate these processes was very useful, as well as the ability that they had to capture provenance information. And one useful feature that emerged in these systems was that they adopted the data flow model. which is, very simple, and it was widely adopted by the systems at that point in time. And one big advantage of this model is that, once you define a data flow, it's very easy to automatically optimize and parallelize it, right? And the data flow itself, together with the inputs, are the provenance for the outputs that are derived in an experiment, right? Another advantage of this particular model is that, the simple programming model lends itself very nicely to visual programming interfaces. And one of the goals of these systems was to cater to end users, to domain experts that didn't have necessarily training in computer science. So the idea is that through visual programming, they could easily assemble these, computational pipelines. And, this ability of creating abstractions over data flows also enabled these systems to create these different levels of abstractions that are closer to the semantics of the actual experiment. So, for example, instead of using or thinking about specific functions in this VTK library, for the expert, it's more intuitive to talk about extracting isosurface as opposed to doing a contour filter of VTK's dataset matter. So these systems also aim to attain usability, right? However, these systems had an important limitation because they're designed to automate repetitive tasks. But when you're talking about data-driven exploration, changes the norm. When you're doing these exploratory analyses, you start with data, you do some computation, generate some results, reason about them, generate new hypotheses, you change your computation, try different methods, different parameters, different data sets, and you keep doing this in a trial and error process until you do have like your aha moment, right? The problem is that after many steps, it's very easy to get lost and not remember how a result was derived. And there's a lot of opportunities for mistakes to happen. There are many ways that you could be wrong, or your data could be wrong, or your computation environment could be buggy, right? And in this tortuous path from data to knowledge, it's important to understand, interpret, and trust your results. Because as more and more we're making important decisions based on the results of computations and data, these incorrect conclusions can have real serious consequences. Right? So this limitation was what motivated us to work on this system called these trails. And the big idea of behind these trails was that it looked at capturing provenance, not just data provenance, but the provenance for the exploratory process. All the trail that one follows to carry out an experiment or understand that problem. Right. So this provenance, so we will call this provenance for exploratory tasks, which are tasks that you iteratively refine as you generate and test your hypothesis. And it's very common in visualization, data cleaning, machine learning, and analytics. Right. And an important feature here is that we wanted to have a system that could be used for science. Right? So the way that this work in these trails is very, very simple. You can think of it essentially as a glorified version control system, but that captures this trail in a transparent way. So you can start, maybe you're studying weather. These are temperatures in Utah, and you start with a basic histogram to look at the distribution of different temperatures over a year. But then, maybe now you want to study the relationship between temperature and precipitation. So you modify your basic histogram, and now you generate a scatter plot that plots temperature versus precipitation, right? And then you're not satisfied with this plot because it doesn't have description. So you go ahead and you change the color and you add the title for the plot. And as you do this transparently, the system is keeping the whole history, all the trails that you've actually followed during your exploration. Right? So this is indeed kind of like version control, but it's a special kind of version control that encodes some of the application semantics. And what do I mean by that? Is that here the provenance actually consists of changes applied to the workflows, modifications that you make to the workflows, add a module, add a connection, change a parameter value, right? And in this version tree here, a node, say VT, corresponds to the workflow that is constructed by applying the sequence of actions, adding modules, changing parameters, and so on and so forth, right? So you can think of it as, you have this action algebra that, you apply these, you compose these algebraic actions in order to construct these individual workflows. And what is nice about this model is that, yes, we designed it for workflows and for workflow manipulation, but you can easily apply it to other domains, and we did. We used the same model to add provenance to other tools, including ParaView or Autodesk Maya. And the way that you model the algebra is that you make these actions be actions that are meaningful to that particular explorational tool. So for example, for Maya, these actions would be actions that are used in order to create and modify three-dimensional objects. So what are the benefits of having these provenance trails, right? The first one is that it provides support for reflective reasoning in the sense that you can follow different paths, backtrack, but you never forget where you have been, right? The other benefit is that you can easily compare the different data, not only the different data products that you derive, but you can also compare the different computations that you use to derive those data products, right? So here is, actually the difference visual difference between two workflows. This workflow with the dark gray, orange, and light gray are the ones used to generate this visualization here, whereas this other part with the dark gray and the blues are the ones used to generate this visualization here. So you can see the difference in the images, and you can see that the computational difference is the fact that this was generated using isosurfaces, and this other one was generated using volume rendering. So you know what causes particular effects in your final result, right? And because we have the action algebra, you can actually compute these differences very easily by simply computing the difference of the actions, one set of actions minus the other set of actions, right? The algebra also provides a systematic way of exploring parameter spaces and comparing the results. And you can do that by simply, composing these set parameter actions. And by doing that here, we can, for example, explore different isosurface values and see what the results look like. And we can do not only with parameters, but also with different computational models. So for example, I could do an exploration where I, tried all of these visualizations, but using, say, volume rendering instead. Right? And we can do this efficiently because we're using the data flow model. We can automatically cache the intermediate results, and we can share and use these shared computations across different runs instead of recomputing everything from scratch each time. Right? We also use this, provenance. We explored the other uses for this provenance. So one of them was to, once you have multiple users using such a system, you can actually analyze a collection of workflows that they created, and you can mine fragments of the workflows that co-occur. And we can use these fragments to predict sets of likely workflows that could be recommended to users as they're constructing their workflow. So very much like a web browser suggesting URL completions. You can add a module, and by looking at the history, the system could suggest, oh, you could add these modules around this one in order to create a complete workflow. And here's a more concrete example where you add a module to say, read the particular data file, and the system would automatically suggest completions for the workflows that generated different types of visualizations for that particular data set. Right? So in a way, this can actually be seen as kind of like the co-pilot of the Stone Age, right? That was done, in around 2008. Another use for, this provenance was in this operation, which we call workflow refinement by analogy. And the idea here is that because we know how these workflows evolved, we know which modules do what to results. So for example, I have a workflow that generates this object here, and then I change that workflow by using the smooth poly data filter so that I can generate a smooth version of that actual object, right? But then later I can come with much more complex objects, and I'd like to do the same thing. I'd like to do the smoothing, right? So by having that, we can actually use this history of changes in order to do this in an automated way. And here's the example. You can have your original visualizations, the original object and the smooth version. And you can create an analogy, right? You can say that this is to this as this is to that. And what this is doing underneath is it's actually creating a new workflow, a modified version of this workflow that contains the smoothing. So this was, all great. These trails, by many measures was extremely successful. It had lots of different users, was used in many different scientific domains. We published many papers, and there were at least 3 PhD dissertations that were based on the system and the work and the research that we did for the system, right? But still it has a number of limitations. It's great if you adopt the system, right? Because you can only reap the benefits that it gives if you adopt it. But the adoption cost can be high, in the sense that the users have to integrate modules and libraries that they use in order to build their computational pipelines. And last but not least, it does support provenance because it captures the computational steps, but that you cannot necessarily reproduce that, for example, if you move your workflow to a different environment. Right? So the next step and the next question that we asked ourselves was, can we make reproducibility easy after the fact? So these trails and workflow systems in general are great if you make a decision, okay, I'm going to work in this environment and I'm going to get reproducibility out of that, right? But what if I've already done my experiment and now I want to publish it and I want to make it reproducible? Okay. So to answer this or to attack this challenge, we built a system called ReproZip. And the idea here is that, you can have all the scripts and workflows and data, but you cannot really expect that other people will get these and be able to run them, because libraries get updated, operating system changes will disrupt reproducibility or even the correctness of the results, right? So the underlying idea of behind ReproZip is that we should capture provenance for the computational environment, and ReproZip does that by tracking, dependencies at the OS level. In fact, it uses ptrace. So what it does is, you run your experiment, you call ReproZip, and it will systematically listen and see everything that is used by your experiment. Once you have this provenance, you can actually create a self-contained package that contains everything that is needed for your experiments. All binaries, libraries, data, dependencies, and so on. And you can also use that provenance to derive a specification of the workflow for the experiment. Once you have this package, you can attain portability through virtualization with virtual machines, Docker, and Singularity. So you have your package, you created it on Linux, but you can run it on the cloud, on a Mac machine, or on a Windows machine. And like these trails, it also had a number of users and uses. It works for command line kinds of experiments, but it has been used to reproduce websites, interactive applications, and so on. And you can get a better idea of these different uses. If you're interested, you can check this link here. Right. So second step, but ReproZip is great, but still we don't have that nice history that you had with vStrails, because here we are doing things at the operating system level. We're not really seeing, how the different parameters change, what is happening in, underlying the actual scripts and the experiment, the actual code in the experiment. So the other idea was, can we get the kind of features and benefits that vStrail gives, but without forcing people to adopt a new system? Can you do that, for example, in widely used tools such as, Python and Jupyter notebooks? Right. So this is what No Workflow attempts to do. Instead of running Python, you can run No Workflow. And when you do that, the system will actually capture the whole provenance of your script while it's running, including the parameter changes and so on. And that can be used in two different modes. It can be used in the same, planning for reproducibility mode that is used for scientific workflow systems, which is you can use No Workflow for the entire experiment lifetime. And there you're going to have the whole history of everything that was done for your experiment. And if you're just interested in reproducibility after the fact, you can capture the run just after the experiment is ready for publication. Right? So this is kind of like, I hope that this shows kind of like a progression of, different issues and how we can make reproducibility more ubiquitous and more usable. Right? And so, let's just, take a step back and, okay, we did all that work, and I talked about work that I did, but if you look more broadly, there's been substantial progress, and many different tools and infrastructures have been developed that make it much easier to attain reproducibility today. And in that sense, I agree with what Thorsten said this morning, right? So today it's a lot easier to work in a reproducible fashion. Not only you have, infrastructure like virtualization, cloud, version control, you also have a number of tools that support reproducibility. These tools have gone a long way. So for example, one tool that I really like is R Markdown that enables you to create very sophisticated live reproducible documents. And this is a big leap from the kind of infrastructure that we supported in vStrails to create reproducible papers where, people would use LaTeX commands to embed the provenance of the results in the paper. Right? So there has been a lot of progress. A number of the lessons learned are being applied. We can also see that a number of tools have adopted the data flow model, Spark, scikit-learn, TensorFlow, AutoML systems, and they can reap the benefits of the data flow model, including the ability to reproduce the results. And we've also seen a number of people that are rediscovering many of the challenges that we have addressed in the past. It was very interesting when I was looking at these new MLOps tools, and I saw this quote here in Neptune.ai. So I was developing a machine learning model, and within a few weeks of extensive experimentation, we got promising results. Unfortunately, we couldn't tell what performed best because we didn't track feature versions, didn't record the parameters, and use different environments to run our models. After a few weeks, we weren't even sure what we have actually tried, so we needed to rerun pretty much everything. So I kind of saw the same exact motivation that we had for vStrails, applied here to the machine learning engineering environment. Industry has, as people have discussed before today, ML is the big thing, and industry is investing a lot in tools that can actually help with this math and with these challenges here. A number of tools are emerging that support what people call MLOps. And these tools capture provenance of code, data, configuration, hyperparameters, environments, and the results that are produced by these models. And of course, the goal here is also to share and to reproduce these machine learning models. And you can see different approaches that are being used by these tools. Some look very much like workflow systems, but like these trails, they also capture this idea of model evolution, how computation evolves over time. And some of the examples of those are DVC and MLflow. And some of these systems also support APIs that enable users, programmers, to capture provenance from scripts, and they do so by providing annotations and function calls to do this provenance capture. And again, there's been a lot of work done, not only in workflow systems, but in provenance and provenance from scripts. We have a whole survey on the techniques that do this. And one thing that I'm not sure about is, how much, these people are actually aware of the work that has been done. So some food for thought here. And besides MLOps, another class of tools in which data provenance and reproducibility are featured prominently are these enterprise data catalogs. A lot of people are talking about data lakes and data being used in different parts of the enterprise. And these tools have been developed to help keep track of the provenance of data derivation, of what applications are using the data, transforming the data queries, and so on. So it's great to see, again, an industry need and a number of systems that, are solving problems that we also have in the scientific domain, right? There's been a lot of progress, but unfortunately, attaining reproducibility can still be difficult. And even though we have a number of tools, many of them address specific problems in specific scenarios. And not always these tools are interoperable. As a result, we are left with a number of gaps, and that can be very difficult to systematically capture all the steps that you go through that are executed across distinct tools or computational environments, as well as the respective dependencies with libraries, operating systems environment. And as a result, we are often in need to create specialized solutions from scratch if we want to capture all the provenance. And this is costly and very time-consuming. Okay? And this is, one of the findings that we had in the National Academy studies that led to the following recommendation, which is, that funding agencies and organizations should invest more in research and development of open source usable tools and infrastructures for reproducibility, right? And I'll go a step further and say that we need to go from the piecemeal approach where we have all these different tools that may or may not talk to each other to a more comprehensive ecosystem where we can actually support reproducibility for studies across different domains in a seamless fashion. Right? So what I'd like to see tomorrow, right? Looking forward, I'd like our community to aim for what I call zero effort reproducibility, where provenance tracking and reproducibility are standard features of our computational environments. We do our work, and transparency and reproducibility are for free. And we can only achieve that if we work together as a community, looking at the problem as a whole. All right, but one point that sometimes gets lost in the discussion about reproducibility is that reproducibility is not the end goal. It's actually the means by which we can build trust and explain the results of our scientific endeavors. Right? So let's look at this example, and this is a simplified very simplified version of a workflow used by a colleague at Berkeley who is an astronomer. And this is kind of like what his group does on a day-to-day basis. They have data collected at telescope site. This data is transferred to some HPC facility in France and LBNL. The data is, prepared. They run simulations, and all the results are sent to Berkeley back to the Data Science Institute to be analyzed. And sometimes they find like interesting features in their results, and they are often faced with the question whether these features are discovery that would give my colleague another Nobel Prize, or if it's a bug, right? And of course, he only has one Nobel Prize, maybe he's gonna get another one, but there are tons and tons of different bugs, right? And the problem is that it's really hard to figure out where this comes from. It could be a problem in the data, in the scripts that for preparing the data, in the simulation code or the analysis. And it could even be something that is an artifact of the computational environment or the unforeseen interactions between libraries, programming languages, hardware, and operating system. Right? And I think that the more I thought about this problem, we talk about computational environments as being controlled environments, but they are very complex and they may hide interactions that can impact the results of computation. So in a sense, yes, it's a controlled environment, but it behaves very much like, in some cases, behaves very much like a natural system. Right? And we've seen a number of cases where, such problems have arisen. Some of them have been reported. And I'm sure there are many that have never been found because they are very hard to detect. So this one is, somebody found a bug in a Python script that may have affected a number of studies. I think this was in chemistry. There was another, headline, another paper that talked about issues with the software-free surfer that is used in urinalysis. And depending on the version of the software, hardware, and operating system, it actually gave different measurements, sometimes, big difference in the different measurements. So overall, I think that, when we move to data-driven exploration, we've done a great job at making it easy for people to derive results. We have a very rich ecosystem of open source software. We've developed usable tools for end users that don't have training in computer science. And more recently, we're actually trying to automate certain parts of data science, like automatically building end-to-end machine learning pipelines or automatically building visualization. So it's really easy to derive results. I think now it's really important that we turn our attention to democratizing trust and robustness. And we need to learn from science and the scientific method that we need to build trust in our results. And we can do that through replication studies and uncertainty quantification, right? So this is actually a quote from the NIS report where we say that repeated findings of consistent results tend to confirm the veracity of scientific conclusion. And by the same token, repeated failures confirm raised doubts, right? So we need to be able to systematically debug and test data and computations and be able to explain those results. And this is something that should be much easier for us to do when we're dealing with computing and data than scientists that have to design experiments, complex experiments that are very hard to repeat. And we've taken some strides in, explainable AI, but we really need to move towards explaining general computations, right? And in order to do this, we need to have reproducibility. And reproducibility is a requirement for us to verify and build trust in computational results. And if we have reproducibility, we have a great opportunity to create new methods that do what I like to call machine-assisted debugging by automating replication studies. So you have your reproducible pipeline, but you can vary and perturb the data. You can explore parameter spaces, compare different methods, try different operating systems, different library versions, and or test domain-specific constraints and see the effect of these changes on your results, right? And in the end, you can end up with causal explanations for results, features, or problems that you actually have in your experiment. And we've actually done some work in this area. We built a system called BotDoc that does exactly that. It leverages the ability to re-execute or to reproduce a pipeline, and then we automatically derive different instances, different assignments to parameter values of that space in order to come up with causal explanations for behaviors observed in pipeline results. Okay, so talked a lot about tools. We move into, the second pillar of broadening reproducibility, which is outreach and education. Right? So we've done quite a bit of work in outreach and education at NYU in the context of the Moore's Law data science environment, which that had as a goal to build a culture of data science or data-driven science at the university. And the first thing that we did was to hire a reproducibility librarian. I don't know if she's here in the audience, Vicky Rantan. And we created a partnership with the NYU libraries to offer university-wide courses and tutorials on tools and infrastructure that support reproducibility. We also offered office hours with the reproducibility librarian, and students, staff, researchers could ask questions about how they should manage their research data or how to make their work reproducible. We use different methods to teach best practice to graduate students, from including reproducibility modules in existing courses to having dedicated courses, like, for example, how to cite data and code data. And the NYU Data Services provides a number of more general courses on different topics that are important for reproducibility. But outside NYU, there's been a proliferation of training and courses on reproducibility. At Berkeley, my colleagues Philip Stark and Fernando Perez added reproducibility to their statistical data science course. Coursera has a course on reproducible research, and NIH now has training modules for researchers to learn how to comply with the new requirements that the Institute is actually putting forth. Another type of outreach that we've done within the Moore's Law data science environment was this book, which was done in collaboration between Berkeley, NYU, and the University of Washington. Is this book that collects a series of use cases, a collection of workflows of real experiments that people made reproducible, the lessons learned, the tools used. And the idea is that these provide examples so that people can, when they're faced with challenges on how to make their work reproducible, they can come here and see examples of how these problems or this challenge may have been addressed. We've also created some shared resources. We have the site reproduciblescience.org that has information about reproducibility, but also has this reproducibility directory that we aimed to be a community-led effort where people could both look for information relevant to reproducibility, but also contribute to it. We have a Twitter bot that tracks, mentions to reproducibility on Twitter automatically. And our partners at the University of Washington also created a resource with materials for teaching different types of courses that are shared and people can reuse. But there are not that many resources out there, or if there are, we don't know about. We need to work as a community to create and maintain these and disseminate more about these different resources. Right. So, so I think that outreach and education are very important, but there are both opportunities, unforeseen benefits, and challenges. And at NYU, we've seen a number of benefits that go beyond just training people on reproducibility. Through these outreach activities, we were able to build bridges across NYU units, as well as with other universities. In fact, new research collaborations have arisen from some of these efforts. We found new use cases and users for the tools that we're developing, as well as new requirements that kept us honest and actually doing work that is relevant and that people need in practice. And we've also seen a wider adoption of best practices. One of the challenges is that it's very hard to measure the effectiveness of the different interventions that we made. How effective are the office hours or the courses? We don't have a good way of actually measuring that. And another challenge is sustainability. We had funding from the Moore's Law Foundation for the Moore's Law data science environment. The funding is over. How do we keep these activities going, right? We need community involvement and ideas on how to make these efforts sustainable. In terms of incentives, again, I've also been part of a number of efforts to establish incentives. So as incentive for authors, we have this reproducibility badges that ACM gives. You publish your paper, and if your results are reproduced, you get a badge saying that the results have been reproduced. If you provide the actual data and code, you have another badge where that states that your paper, the artifacts for your paper are available. And we've also created best paper awards to incentivize authors to submit their experiments for reproducibility evaluation. And in terms of incentives for reviewers, one nice idea was implemented by ACM Toms and the Information Systems Journal, is that they introduced this idea of companion papers that serve as a reproducibility report for the papers that are published in the journals, but they are co-authored by the reviewers and the original authors of the papers. Okay. But there are some challenges when you're trying to come up with these incentives, right? So Philippe talked about ACM SIGMOD, and that I think was the first SIG that adopted this idea of reproducibility evaluation for their papers. It started in 2008, right? And it started as voluntary submission. You have your paper accepted, then you can submit your experiments for reproducibility evaluation. And as it turns out, few papers submitted, and over the years, even with the ACM badges or with the potential of getting a best paper award, there was a very small uptake. Only 10 to 15% of the accepted papers submitted their experiments for evaluation. So recently I was chair for PVLDB, and I pushed for a different approach. Instead of focusing on reproducibility and doing it in a voluntary way, let's require people to abide to transparency and require all papers to submit code and data, which for authors is much easier to do than packaging and adding instructions for the review committee to rerun their experiments. And the result was that we had a much higher uptake. As of this year, 90% of the accepted papers to the LDB got the artifacts available badge from ACM. Right? So I think that one lesson learned here is that we get excited and we want to push this idea, but culture change takes time. And I think that sometimes smaller steps can be more effective, and if they were in this particular case here. Last one, which is enforcement. And, for a long time, we relied on voluntary adherence to reproducibility best practices. I think that the first requirement came from Nature, where they said that they're required to make materials, data, and code available with their papers. But what I'm told is that there's still a number of papers that do not follow these reporting standards that are purportedly required by Nature. NIH and NSF are also still doing guidelines, but they're talking more and more about putting teeth and having real requirements. And a recent memorandum from the OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy from the White House, is now mandating that research, all research that is done with federal funds, should actually be completely available, free for everybody by the date of publication, right? So, I think that this memo is going to have a very strong effect on culture change at institutions, and I'm already seeing this at NYU. That is, we are building, very, how can I say, comprehensive infrastructure so that the researchers at NYU can actually comply with this new requirement. How effective this is going to be, only time will tell. All right, so I covered all the different 4 aspects of broadening reproducibility adoption, and I'd like to share a final thought with you, and this is a topic that I've been thinking more and more, which is, how can we put science in computer science? And I've had some discussions with people that study philosophy of science, and some joke that fields that aspire to be scientific but are not often append science to their name, right? And this is the case for us in computer science. And computer science is really not a science. But more and more, our research relies on empirical observations. And as I mentioned before, computational environments in many ways behave like natural systems. We're dealing with these machine learning and large language models that we don't really understand if and how they actually work. Torsten talked about performance. Folks in HCI do user studies, and all of these, in order for to have rigor, we need to follow the scientific method, and we need to become more of a science. And one big challenge is that, as computer scientists, we lack the training as well as the culture, on how to carry out these studies, on how to publish those results, right? And one very good example is, in machine learning, there was this paper that was published in ICML 2019, and essentially what they did was a replication study. Everybody in machine learning uses ImageNet as a benchmark. And what they did is that they created a new version of ImageNet. And they used that to test existing classification models. And what they found is that these classification models do not generalize well to new data. In particular, new data that contains harder images. So you see a huge gap in the performance of the models on the original benchmark and in the new benchmark, right? So we really need to, as a community, to push for, the adoption and for following the scientific method. What people do, formulating hypotheses, properly designing experiments to test these hypotheses, measuring and reporting the uncertainty for which we need all the statistics that Torsten was talking about earlier today. And there's no question that we can only do this if we have transparency and reproducibility. So to close and conclude, there's no question that data-driven exploration has transformed not just science, but many different segments of our society, and that we made amazing progress in making it easy for people to use computation and data to derive insights. But now we need to work on democratizing the trust and robustness of these results that we get. We need new methods that guide users that as they do exploration, that help them assess the quality as well as debug their results, and that gives them the ability to reason about, explain their data and their computations, right? And we can only do this if we have a more systematic way and having provenance capture and reproducibility as a standard feature of all the tools and computation environments that we use. And if we have that, then we can actually work on a number of new and challenging and impactful research problems. For example, the first one is, how do we achieve this goal, right? How do we go from these piecemeal approaches to reproducibility to ubiquitous provenance and reproducibility? What kinds of methods we can develop to help automate to a great extent this, the debugging of computational results. LLMs, again, all this idea of co-pilot, and applying that to guide users in data exploration, I think there's a lot of promise. And we as a community are very well positioned to have tremendous practical impact. And last but not least, I'm very happy to see, ACM rep. Kudos to all people that have made it happen, because I really see this as having a great potential to serve as a focal point to create, sustain, and grow a community around reproducibility, where we can share more information, resources, and work together to address all these different challenges, as well as making computer science and computing more like science. And that's it. Thank you so much. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Juliana, questions? Right.
Just ask it out. Yeah, my question is, the true test for reproducibility and replicability is someone endeavoring to do those. What about like a track at conferences? A lot of the papers cited in the two keynotes were like these nice adversarial papers that were kind of like the enforcement, people getting caught having poor experiments or showing poor data, but there's very little incentive. I'm thinking myself as a PhD student to go do that because it doesn't really, I wouldn't consider it research in the way I view my own research. I'd like to, so that, I feel like we're focusing on reproducibility, but where's this other side of it? Like security researchers have pen testers, and they do AV, like you need the adversarial component to actually challenge you to make sure it's reproducible. Or, yeah.
But I think this is a very, that's an important question, right? And I'm of the opinion that not every work needs or deserves to be fully reproducible, right? And this is one of the reasons that I think that the starting point of focusing on transparency and making the work available, the data and code, is a really good first step. Because naturally, works that are useful and impactful, they will eventually be reproduced, right? If I'm developing a technique, there's somebody that developed a similar technique, I'm gonna get their code, I'm gonna make it run, and I'm gonna compare it against mine, right? So naturally, this evaluation is gonna be done in the natural course of the scientific endeavor, right? So it's a good question. I don't think that there's a, should everything be reproducible? I think no, maybe it's just too much work. But if my dream comes true and reproducibility is automatic, you do your work and it's automatically reproducible, if we get there, then I would say, yes, let's make everything reproducible.
Thanks. Jay?
So what do you see as the right balance between research papers and code? Because you had one section where you were talking about that the paper is the advertisement for the code. Do you think we need to rebalance that, or is that something that we need some more information to kind of better understand what that balance should be?
So I'm not sure I understand your question in terms of balance, right? So I think what happened in, when this whole data-driven science started was that people just published their plots, right? So you had no idea of what actually went into that. You can publish the results of machine learning model, but if you don't tell me, how many iterations you ran, how many layers you have in your network and so on, you won't be able to, understand what is going on, right? So I think that the push for transparency is kind of like asking people to, okay, send me your code, your parameters, and all the configuration that you use for your experiment. The paper still continues the same, but now it's enriched with the actual tools and the artifacts that you use to produce the results. Right. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
That mostly does. What I was thinking is that right now people look at the research paper as the authority. And if we shift so that the code is more important, then the authority shifts from being 100% the paper to some percentage code, some percentage paper. And that's really the question. I think you also brought up there right now, again, the last piece, which is how much of it's the data. So there's a balance among all of those for what's the authority place that people really should start.
Right. I mean, so the paper provides, how can I say, it's the summary of what the findings are, right? But it may be inconsistent with the actual code and data. So in terms of like what is more important, I think it depends. It depends on the experiments. It depends on the paper. It depends on the problem that you're actually trying to solve.
Thank you very much for your talk. I really appreciated all the tools, especially that you presented. And I come from an information science community, so I have been able to, relate to and know most of them. Now, I'm also working in the high performance computing community, and I've noticed there's a tremendous gap between these two communities, and the tools that have been developed like ReproZip and data lakes and Wholetail, none of this actually is even known, and even like you encounter people who don't even know what FAIR is in the high performance computing community. So I'm wondering where do you see the research going in terms of bridging these two communities? Where should the workflows go in order for this to happen?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I think that this is a natural thing that happens. Is people rediscover problems, people rediscover solutions, right? And it's important to have this cross-pollination across different domains. In theory, that's what we should aim for. In practice, it can be different because you have different cultures, you have different requirements. I think that Torsten outlined very well a number of specific requirements that you have in HPC, like with floating points, with some of the computational environments and so on, that, for example, are not really prevalent in some other areas of computer science. Right. So I think you pose a very good question, and maybe ACM REP can be the focal point that can bring these disparate communities together. And maybe we can better leverage each other's results and contributions.
Last question, Reed?
Sure. First off, fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed it. Revolution from Sandia National Labs. So I have a question for you, because you brought up a really interesting point with the reproducibility librarian bit, right? To what extent is reproducibility a labor specialization issue? So as the demand for computing has increased, we are seeing a proliferation of different kinds of roles in scientific computing. Research software engineers, DevOps, MLOps people, IT service management people, HPC facilities management people. Would you, do you think that there is room for kind of an expansion of roles for people that do reproducibility and data stewardship? Because it sounds like you, like at NYU, that's something that's being done, where you have someone with a specialized role to educate others and to fill that stewardship role.
Exactly, right? So, and we do that not just for reproducibility, but for everything around it, like what you say, data services, data management. I think that there is a need, right? In particular, you know, with these new mandates that are coming from the federal government, people need to be more careful how they manage their data, how manage their experiments. And at least as we move towards that, we need to have people that can help our researchers navigate, because there is a long learning curve and there is this need for cultural change. And we need these people we need to have some stewarding to get that done. Whether this is going to last forever, I don't know. I mean, research engineers are here for a long time, and I don't see the need for them to go away. So maybe reproducibility librarians and the experts are here to stay.
Maybe.
I think we're out of time. Thank you so much, Juliana.
Thank you.
Real quick.